Hello and welcome back to the Boxing Social podcast in association with Betfred, with me, your host, Rob Tebbutt. Just before we get started today, just like to remind everybody to please subscribe, turn on your notifications for more boxing content. Now that's out of the way, welcome to the new Boxing Social podcast, joined today by Mr. Andi Purewal of Boxing Social. You've all heard his voice, particularly over the last year, gallivanting across the United States and the world, but he's now found himself back in London. So welcome, Andy. Your first appearance on the Boxing Social podcast. I know this is a big moment for you. So welcome, mate.
Thank you for allowing me to join in on this experience, Rob.
Don't say allow, it makes me sound like a tyrant. People will learn that themselves. But yeah, obviously we've decided to bring Andy in today on the podcast. You've had yourself an interesting year, coming up to a year now since you've been traveling through this COVID-19 period of the world. Everybody's been grounded and ground to a halt and stuck in their little box rooms like me. And you've been out traveling the world. So we're going to have a little recap today and see if there's any adventures that you can fill us in on. Maybe keep some of the Vegas stuff out. But first and foremost, it's probably a good idea to just ask you to sum up the whole experience, mate. The last 12 months or so have been quite the roller coaster for you.
I don't really think you can sum it up. Like we always have this conversation. I don't ever think about a fight or where I'm going until it's actually done. Because when you're going, doesn't matter whether it's Vegas or it's at the Brentwood Centre, like I'm going to do a job. So you don't really think about it till you're there. Till you've finished doing it. So it was just, now I reflect on it all and just sitting here going through all of the fights. It's been crazy to think during a pandemic when it's been near enough for impossible for most people to travel to Europe, never mind to America. It's been fantastic. Obviously starting off with Canelo Smith and then just going on from there. It's just non-stop, and I'm just grateful and fortunate to have been in the position to be able to do so. And I'd like to think my hard work has certainly paid off for us over the last 8 or so months.
Yeah, of course it has. You've done fantastically well. Not just saying that on camera, obviously I've said it to you privately as well. Before we kind of get into it and have a look at all of the cards that you've covered and you tell us a little bit about it, just go right back to the start of the pandemic. I remember speaking to you after, I think it's John O'Carroll, Scott Quigg was the last show before the pandemic. Everything completely changed. Before we get into your traveling, just explain to people the start of the pandemic, what that was like for you, what that was like for your day-to-day and work, and how it changed things for you.
It's one thing that people like, but when they see it, like, certainly on boxing Twitter, they see me in a suit and where I'm at, and they think he's living the life. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't change the job for the world, but it is very demanding. It is a lot of hard work. And when we first initially went into lockdown, you've gone from being out and about every day or every other day to then having to do Zooms, chasing people up, and it's a bit relentless, and it's difficult to actually get, the bigger names to want to do a Zoom because they'd rather do something else with their time than to look at their phone or look at their laptop to do an interview. So the beginning was just difficult to adjust, and I'm sure like everybody, we've had those tough moments when you kind of need to just power through. But once you kind of get through it and you get an understanding to how things work and you adjust and adapt to it, it was relatively straightforward. And then obviously moving back out to be able to cover shows the way that I've known for the years building up to this past year or so, was just felt like a breath of fresh air again.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, I know from experience at the time as well. It's not only the fact that I think everybody was still really confused. Nobody really knew what was going on with the world. But also, you're kind of speaking to fighters about fights that they don't know if they're going to have. They don't know what, like at the start of the pandemic, I think people forget that fighters weren't even allowed into the gym. So fighters weren't even training at home. You saw coaches doing like FaceTime coaching sessions with people at home and stuff like that. So when you did eventually nail somebody down to get an interview, it was like, what are we going to talk about? It was a very interesting time. I think the first show you covered back before we get into your trips would have been, is it right? Am I right in saying Joshua Boatsi, Marco Kalic? Was that the first one?
Yeah, that was the first one. And again, it was just a weird experience. Like you turn up and everybody's on edge about, this was when COVID tests were really strict. So everybody's turning up. And we all did the COVID test, and then out of all the people in the world to fail, Eddie tested positive for COVID. So then he obviously had to get kicked out of his room, and I was speaking to Frank Smith about it, and Frank said that he had to go and tell Eddie that he'd failed his test, so he tested positive for COVID. And he just messaged him, he called him, and he was like, "You're not going to believe me, mate." He's like, Eddie's there like, piss off. he already knew what was coming, and yeah, like, that was just surreal to obviously know one of the biggest promoters in the world had caught it, had to be kicked out. But just to kind of go back to that event, it was just nice to be able to do what I'd been known to do prior to COVID, prior to lockdown, just in different circumstances. Just obviously everybody in a bubble, you're not allowed to leave the hotel premises. But again, it was the new norm, so it was good to kind of get something in early and get an experience in as to what to expect for the months moving forwards until what we see today is hopefully the world opening back up.
Yeah, no, so when people sort of may not understand, that's still a 6-month period. I think the Buatsi Kalic fight, I think, was early October, end of September. So you're talking 6 months of sitting in the room day in, day out. We didn't furlough anybody at Boxing Social. In hindsight, probably a little bit of a regret. Would have been a good idea to maybe make the most of some of that furlough money the government was dishing out, but we didn't. So we were kind of, I mean, we were at one stage, we were... the daily content was Tyson Fury's workout in his living room with his family, which was an interesting time to be in boxing content, but there we go. Right, so moving on, of course, we are here to talk about Andy's American Adventure. That's going to be the title. So Canelo versus Callum Smith. Obviously, Callum Smith, somebody that you've known for a long time. Canelo is now apparently one of your friends. But anyway, we'll come on to that slightly later on. Canelo, Callum Smith, what a great fight to put the 6-7 months behind you of kind of, sitting around in the room, not really doing much. But what a great fight and a great experience. But traveling, how different was that? Because obviously you had to get your national interest exemption, whatever. I don't have one, so I don't know. What was the whole experience like getting out there initially? Because I don't know. Well, I've travelled with you in the past. People who travel with me know that I'm quite a nervous traveller. I don't like to travel. I can't imagine what I would have been like travelling during COVID. So what was that like?
I was on edge for the entire trip, even when you turn up to the hotel. So you get to Heathrow. Well, with the national interest exemption, obviously Matchroom was sorting all that out. So I didn't know anything about it, I think, until 2 days before I was due to fly. So obviously Matchroom had sorted that. Got to the airport, and at the beginning I was just doing my COVID test like a few days before. So you had to have a negative COVID test up to 3 days before flying. And then you had to have proof of your assignment while you were travelling. Obviously, in our case, national interest exemption. You show all your documents, but when you get to the airport, Homeland Security is there and they stop you and they check everything. Thankfully, it was a brief process for the first couple of trips. You get through, obviously security is all the same, but the biggest pain in the backside is you have to wear your mask as soon as you get into the airport, and then until you've left the airport on the other side. So you're wearing a mask for the best part of 15 hours or something if you add it all up, and it kills you. But then the benefit is because nobody could travel when you're on your aeroplane, even like we're in economy, you've got the entire plane to yourself, so you could go and sit in a different row every hour if you wanted to. So you just put your feet up and fall asleep across 3 seats. So that was great. And then obviously you get escorted over to the Canelo Smith fight hotel. You turn up and they immediately start checking your temperature. You're okay, you go to your room, did a test the next morning, and then you kind of had to wait then for your results to come back. And I didn't know until I came back that if I'd have tested positive at any point, I would have had to stay out there for 14 days, which would have meant obviously spending Christmas and New Year's in a hotel in Texas on my own, which I didn't know. And I'd still take that risk now, whether I'd have known it or not, because it was just on the back of such a tough 8 months to be able to get back to doing such a big show and doing what I loved in person, wouldn't have been able to change that for anything. And obviously the numbers for that week for us were just massive, which it kind of gave me a bit more of an oomph back almost, because you see the rewards for all of your hard work throughout certainly lockdown and beyond and before that as well.
Yeah, I think people people may be interested, may not be interested, but throughout the pandemic, obviously, with boxing grinding to a halt, we're a boxing media outlet, boxing news channel. Less searches for boxing, less suggested videos means that even when you are getting people to agree to do a Zoom for 10-15 minutes, you're not really getting the payoff. The numbers aren't the same. You're not making as much money. Obviously, when you do something, you don't get as much of a sense of achievement, fulfillment when you're not hitting those big numbers. But obviously, we went out to Canelo Smith. I think the first video that we put up was the head-to-head. where Callum Smith dwarfed Canelo. I think Callum's 6'3", 6'3", 6'4". Canelo's 4'11" or something from the videos. What was that experience like? What was the vibe in fight week? Because obviously we know Paul Reddy very well, STN Sports, who look after Callum Smith. And from what he was telling me, the mood around fight week, as always is, generally speaking, in fights of that magnitude, was very, very confident. They were very confident that they were there to do a job and they were going to beat Canelo, shock the pound-for-pound #1. Obviously, didn't quite go that way. But what was the experience like throughout fight week? What was the feeling?
It was all like you said, like Callum and the team were very confident, very assured that he was going to be the man since Mayweather to actually be able to turn over Canelo. Even like in the build-up, Callum was always in his room. He never really came down, except for on the Friday night. There was the Golovkin show, so he came and watched it in the lobby with his brothers, with Paul. I was just there knocking about, and that was the only time I saw him out of the room. He had like Canelo never leaves his room. You never saw him once unless it was a media event. But Canelo to deal with on like a personal level on the media was fantastic. Like he gave us like 2 one-on-ones, and for me to be able to say I've interviewed the man who many consider the pound for pound star in boxing, like, it's an experience I'll never be able to sum up or forget. And then again, like because of my relationship with Callum, he always gave me great access. So, you know, we did the media events, but then Callum and Joe Gallagher, you know, they organised for me to be able to do something with Callum in the gym after one of his sessions as well. So like the access was brilliant. Canelo was fantastic to deal with. His English is a lot better than what he lets on as well. You know, he has his translators, but he actually speaks very good English, as we all saw in that Demetrius Andrade burst,
which you were at as well, of course, which we'll come on to in a little bit. Just touching on that with Canelo. You know, we've both interviewed some big names in boxing, and I always say to people that there's certain fighters. I think I've said it previously about Lomachenko. Inoue is another one. Fury's another one. They have a bit of an aura about them. You go and you speak to them, and you kind of get that initial, oh, this is a bit different. Was it like that with Canelo?
Oh, 100%. Like, I'm trying to think off the top of my head if there's anyone who I've ever felt nervous before interviewing. There's 2 which spring to mind. Vladimir Klitschko at the press conference for what should have been the second Fury fight when it was first announced, but never happened. And then Canelo. Well, every time I've interviewed Canelo, I've always gone a bit dry mouth because it's just weird, just knowing that he's just such a big star, and I'd have never really thought. It's 2 years ago, 8 months ago, before lockdown, whatever it may have been, that I'd have been in that position, and you're there interviewing the pound for pound star, and it's just kind of just surreal, basically.
I think I went out for Canelo Kovalev, didn't get a one-on-one. Cheers, Canelo. But anyway,
I can sort something for you.
But I remember after they did we had like a sort of like the final press conference before the press conference, everybody kind of shooting their questions. I remember asking him afterwards when he'd kind of broke and everyone was trying to get a huddle, and I sort of said, when are you coming to the UK to fight Callum Smith and Billy Joe Saunders? And he turned around and in perfect English he went, they're very good fighters, I'll come there soon. And I was like, oh, because he does have that aura about him as well. And he is so small, like he is tiny, isn't he, Canelo Alvarez? You must be around, he's maybe slightly taller than him.
Yeah, I was slightly taller than him, but yeah, he's not a tall guy at all. You know, how he's gone through the weights is remarkable.
Yeah, he is. I think that kind of is part of the surprise of kind of being around him. Anyway, moving on to the fight. So, fight with fans, right? There was fans there for that. It wasn't Billy Joe Saunders Canelo, obviously, which we'll come on to. But there was fans in the arena. What was the atmosphere like on fight night?
Atmosphere is buzzing. Like, obviously we'll come on to Canelo Saunders, but it was just to see live fans back. I think it was only about 30,000 because of restrictions, or at least that's what I think off the top of my head. Yeah, the atmosphere was brilliant, but the Mexican fans love Canelo, so even though it was only 30,000, he felt like it was double that in the arena. And when he ring walked, it was again just an experience you'll never forget, because it feels like everything around you is silent, but it's not actually the case. It's just you so kind of in awe at watching him walk towards the ring, and you know you've got everybody shouting, screaming around you, but you're just focused on watching him. And yeah, it's just, again, it's something you'll never forget.
obviously you know Callum well and you've covered him and you've gone to see him and Joe Gallagher. Obviously he's no longer training with Joe, but in the past you've gone to spend time with him around the gym. As a fighter, you probably know him as well as most that you cover. Were you surprised at the one-sided nature of the fight?
It was a surprise because before the fight, and I'll hold my hands up and I'll say, I saw Callum as having the best chance out of anyone to have been able to beat Canelo because of the size difference. And having spoken to the team and how they wanted to approach the fight, it was very different to what we saw on the night. Obviously, Callum losing his left shoulder so early didn't really help, or left arm. But it was just, I was obviously gutted for him because I had a good relationship and I have a good relationship with Callum, but you got to take your hat off to Canelo, because how many fighters are going to think I'm going to target that left bicep and by the fourth round he's just out of action? I saw it. Callum did the post fight with me the next day. Shout out Callum Smith.
Million views.
Yeah. And he showed me his bicep and he couldn't lift it. He's in agony lifting it more than probably to a 40-degree angle or something. And he was just a tough man to have stuck it out, knowing that he was taking a bit of a beating by the end of it. And I remember reading comments that at one point Joe was considering pulling him out. Obviously, I couldn't hear that, but just looking over Twitter. So just hats off to Callum for being able to tough that out, because I don't know if many people would have been able to.
Yeah, I think there was probably a time around 9-10 where it didn't really look like he had. I mean, Callum's obviously a big puncher, but as you mentioned, his best shot, which is obviously why Canelo targeted the left arm, is that catch and counter left hook. And I think later in the fight, it kind of looked less and less likely that he was going to pull that out of the hat. But yeah, I agree. Hats off to Callum Smith for toughing that one out. I think a lot of fighters would have looked for a way out there, and he didn't. So credit to him for that. We've mentioned the post-fight interview that you did with Callum. What was the vibe? Obviously, we've seen he's disheartened by the fact that he lost his unbeaten record, albeit against a superstar like Canelo. But what was that whole feeling like, and how would you sum that up?
After the fight, it was...
How did the interview come around first, actually?
So, as you know, usually, after a big fight, I know you're kind of, you have to get up early. You've gone to sleep at, say. So after the fight, I think I went to sleep at 5:30. And then I saw Liam in the hotel straight after the fight, and a few of them were down there. I had some food and having a few drinks, and I just said to him, what time are you heading off to the airport to head back? And they said, well, we're leaving at 8 a.m. I was like, well, good luck getting up for that. So I got up at 7:30, had a couple hours sleep, just went down with my camera just to see if I could grab him. And then Liam did something, Ant Crawler did something, Paul did something.
Paul did something, yeah.
Stephen couldn't do something because, so in the morning, Stephen was in his room and nobody could get in, so he wasn't waking up. So apparently he was there for about an hour trying to get him up. So Stephen didn't. Obviously they had to rush off to do that. So then I was just sat down after I'd done those interviews. Joe come down, just having a chat with him, and then Joe did something, and then Callum came down, and Callum was filling in his. You have to fill in a form whenever you come back, your passenger locator form. So I was filling it in, and I just said to him, mate, I completely understand if you do not want to, especially on the back of last night, but it's my job. I'm going to ask, would it be okay if I grabbed you for a couple of minutes? And he said, mate, honestly, it's sound. We'll do something. Let me just sort out this locator form, and we'll do it. And the entire team throughout the week were bang on. And, even though we was in the bubble, so, the Smith brothers, other than Callum, obviously, Paul was down there, Sean O'Toole was down there, was going to the bar on the nights, and it felt normal, for as normal as what we could have expected anyway, which was just the main thing for me. I said, taken away from the trip was being able to feel like life was back to normality just for a week, and that was worth the entire trip for me. Yeah,
and I think it's worth pointing out that it's something that you've already said in this, and I kind of say to people always ask what Saudi was like, and I always say to people, well, it's not really that much different to Manchester when you're doing a fight week, because you go to the event, you go back to the hotel, you do your work, you go to bed, you wake up. So yeah, I can see why, even though it wasn't under normal conditions, why it would feel normal. So after that, you come back home. Thankfully, didn't test positive, so we didn't have to put you up in Texas for an extra 2 weeks, because that'd have been great. What was that like? You had to quarantine when you got back.
Yeah, so you have to come back and then you have to do your day 2 and your day 8 test, and then you quarantine for 10 days. Not allowed to, not allowed to do anything. But I think because it was again because the numbers were so good, you just said, right, everybody can stay off now till like January 4th. So we had like a bit of time off. So even though I couldn't leave the house, just to have some time off to chill and to be with the family was nice, and it was just a positive way to end what was a difficult year for everyone.
Yeah, it certainly was. It was a positive end to the year, and yes, we did have a couple of weeks off. We treated ourselves after not having any time off, no furlough throughout the year. So yeah, that was nice. I didn't get to go to Ryan Garcia versus Luke Campbell, which was January the 1st, which is why I've not been able to travel for the last year. Missed out on that good Uncle Donald Trump NIEs.
Do you regret that? That's something I've never asked.
No.
Because if you'd have gone, you'd obviously been able to still travel.
No, because obviously you know the reasons why I didn't go. We suffered a loss in the family at the end of September, and it was the first Christmas that my partner would have had. It was my partner's father passed away, so I had to stay home for that. It's the only time. I mean, I've put her through the mill over the years with the travelling and the long hours that we do, and it's the only time, to her credit, that she's ever turned around and said, "Look, I really would like you to stay." I did know that if you tested positive, you'd be there for 2 weeks. I think I probably conveniently left that out when I was talking to you. But yeah, the prospect of being away from the family, having to quarantine, I would have had to leave, I think, on Boxing Day morning. So to get there for the fight and what have you. So, I mean, at the time, I didn't know that it would mean that I wouldn't travel for the next year. But yeah, I mean, I can't say I regret it. Family obviously has to come first. Even when you don't like it sometimes. But yeah, so I didn't do Garcia Campbell, which obviously left the door open for you to do Canelo Yildirim, your old mate Canelo, again in February. Slightly different vibe, I'm guessing, to Canelo Smith. Canelo Smith, obviously, unification bout. Callum Smith, unbeaten. A lot of people giving him a good chance going in. I think it's pretty fair to say that not many people were giving Avni Yildirim that much of a chance in his fight with Canelo.
No, as soon as you turned up, I think everybody in the bubble just assumed it would be the easy night work for Canelo. That it turned out to be a 3rd round stoppage.
Yeah.
Well, it didn't come back out for the 4th round. So it was just what everybody expected. Canelo again, brilliant access to him. Got a little.
Did he remember you?
He did, yes. I don't think you can forget this face. I don't think you can forget the accent either, which isn't necessarily a good thing. But yeah, it was just it was a frustrating fight week because you know yourself that I put more pressure on myself to get numbers on YouTube than what I should do. It's only been probably until this last trip when I thought, social media numbers are through the roof. And it's allowed me just to kind of go about without thinking about YouTube.
Yeah, YouTube's as we were saying earlier on. Everybody who's had a YouTube channel in the last 18 months has suffered, unless your thing has been creating content at home. But even still, everybody's YouTube channel, from what I can see, certainly in the sporting world, has suffered. We are a multi-platform company. We do very well on social media, which is something I do have to remind you from time to time. It's not all about them YouTube numbers, but I understand your way of thinking sometimes about it. But anyway, sorry to interrupt. Carry on.
No, that's okay. But yeah, so the numbers just weren't really there. I think, and it was difficult to get interviews because it's still a bubble. Nobody could come in or out. I think we had Canelo, we had Yildirim. Ryan Garcia was pretty much the only other exceptional name. Obviously, you had Eddie there anyway, but it was just difficult to get stuff. I remember I did a really good in-depth with Halt, who was fantastic, just reflecting on his boxing career. But yeah, it was just a tough week, really, just to get any form of numbers. I can't even remember what social media numbers would have been like. But
yeah, they were good.
But yeah, so that week that week actually flew by, to be fair. So yeah.
Yeah, Mr. Robot, Avni Yildirim, wasn't really providing too much of a stiff test for that one, so I don't think there was that much interest. And also the fact that, we've spoken about this, and I think I've mentioned it on other podcasts, about not having a UK interest on cards when you're in America. When we're sending yourself, I mean, I mentioned Canelo Kovalev earlier on. We lost money on Canelo Kovalev. Yeah. I think we probably were around even-ish for Canelo Yildirim. You don't have a UK hook like we did with Canelo Smith, Canelo Saunders, etc. So it does put you up against it. The way, obviously, that we think about it is, you're a boxing media outlet. Canelo's the pound-for-pound #1 fighter in the world. You should be covering his fights, even if you make a small loss on it. Obviously, never intend to make a small loss, but game is the game. Unfortunately, sometimes it does happen. What were your thoughts about the fight? I mean, I think everybody thought it was going to be a one-sided fight. It's what we saw. Was there any Actually, one thing I do want to talk to you about, J Balvin. That was a great... The ring entrances for Canelo Yildirim were by far the best thing about the fight night, that was for sure.
Oh, 100%. That's, again, just something you'll never forget. And he's a really nice guy. Obviously, caught him. It was only like a minute and a half after the event. He's a really nice guy. Should have got his contact, got him on the social podcast.
Yeah, maybe he could have done an intro for us. That was great. That was a really cool intro. The ring walk for Canelo for that, I think, lasted longer than the fight.
I think Eddie's obviously gone above and beyond to make sure he feels comfortable. And Canelo said himself, the extra effort Eddie's gone to make him feel at home, as it's his ring walks in particular are the best that he's ever had, and he's never had an experience like that. And for a fan, never mind as a reporter, just as a fan of the sport, to have again been there for something like that, it's again to go back to after what was a difficult period of time. You don't ever forget it. Yeah,
Eddie does, for all of his faults, of which he has many. He does throw a good party. Loves a bit of pyro, doesn't he, old Eddie? Old pyrotechnic Hearn. After that, Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams. Again, not really the type of, with all due respect to Demetrius Andrade and Liam Williams, not a Wilder Fury, not a Joshua Ruiz or something like that. But as you've mentioned earlier on with Matchroom, shout out Anthony Lever, Frank Smith, and all the team at Matchroom who made it very easy for us, or as easy as possible for yourself to travel over into America at the a really difficult time for anybody to be travelling. So we sent you over for Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams. I gave Liam Williams a real shot in that fight. I thought Liam Williams, I do feel like he equipped himself pretty well. But yeah, that fight week, how was that different? Because you're quite experienced now. I mean, the first time that you went out there, obviously the nerves, and I'd imagine going back for Canelo Yildirim, it got slightly easier, and also some familiar faces, Andrade, Liam Williams, obviously Liam Williams coached by Dom Ingle, who you know. What was that fight week like?
That was again. It was just it was a semi-open bubble. I mean, firstly, I've got to say that hotel is the nicest hotel I've ever stayed.
Yes,
it was amazing. I've never known anything like it.
Yeah, because of the bubble setups. Andy's had to stay and had to make do with staying in the luxurious fighter hotels for the last year. Don't get used to that, mate, because when we have to start going to send you to all of these shows in November, I don't think you're going to be staying in the fighter hotels. What we usually do is we usually find a nice, clean-ish, affordable hotel near to the fighter hotel for you to pitch up at. But yeah, what was the hotel like?
The hotel obviously was amazing. It's huge. Like, they had a water park, they had a golf course. Honestly, it was ridiculous. Unfortunately, I've never played golf and I didn't get a chance to experience the water park, but it was all there.
Last time I sent you to Florida, I sent you with Ryan for
Gibb versus Jake Paul.
Was it that, or was it Florida or LA where there was the triple homicide outside the hotel?
That was Gibb versus Jake Paul.
So that was in Florida?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, slightly nicer hotel than that one, hopefully.
I almost said, so when I sleep, I like to be like really warm, so I turn on like the heating. So me and Ryan got back, and I turned on the heating because I was a bit cold, and the fire alarm started going off because like the dust in the vents had, I think it must have started burning. So then we just started thinking, oh damn, what have I done here? So I picked up all my camera stuff, run out, and then Ryan braved it and went back into training.
Do you remember? So we're going off topic here, but that's fine. Do you remember Usyk Bellew?
Yeah.
So Usyk Bellew, Andy just mentioned that, and obviously I've travelled with Andy, so I know his little bits and pieces when he travels and what he likes to do. Sounds a bit weird, but anyway, you like to sleep with the heating on. So I remember after Usyk Bellew, and again, more often than not when you're doing these big shows, you're interviewing late, you're uploading late, you don't get to bed till 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. I remember getting to bed late, and Chris Lloyd had given us his hotel room because Chris travelled back that night, and we stayed in his really nice hotel, which was great. Until we got woken up by the fire alarm at about 7:30 in the morning. So that was nothing to do with any dust or anything like that. But the room had got so hot that we were woken up by the fire alarm at 7:30 in the morning. So yeah, Andy likes to be sweltering hot when he sleeps, which is one of the strangest things that I've ever come across. But anyway,
I did you a favour because you had to get up.
I did have to get up.
To do an interview.
I did. We were actually staying in the same hotel as Man United with Jose Mourinho was manager. Obviously, a big Chelsea fan. So Jose Mourinho to me is like God. And I remember like getting up and staggering downstairs and waiting outside, and there was a big coach there. I was like, what's this? Like school trip or day out or something like that. And I remember the whole Man United team walked past me. I was like, so yeah, I probably would have overslept for that. So yeah, thanks for that. But Demetrius Andrade versus Liam Williams. Demetrius Andrade, every time we have him on the channel, which is mainly when you've interviewed him over probably the last year or so, he always seems to me to be such a great talker, you know, somebody who I would expect to be a star, but he doesn't ever quite shift the needle enough. I mean, would you agree with that? What's your kind of overriding thoughts on Andrade?
I mean, as a fighter, I think he's a fantastic fighter. It'd be very difficult to beat. He's a bit kind of coming to the end of his 160 reign now. I can't imagine him having too many more there. But I can't quite put my finger on it as to why he can't secure a big fight. You'd have thought after, you know, Liam Williams, he was one-dimensional in that fight with Andrade. You know, just kept walking forwards, but it wasn't a great performance from Andrade. So you'd have thought if you
Liam Williams had him hurt.
Yeah. And if you were a Charlo, you were a Golovkin or a Murata, you'd have looked at him and thought he might be there for the taking. I can't quite put my finger on it because he is a good talker, like you say, and you know he makes time for every interview, and he will give something a little different in each interview as well. So I can't quite put my finger on as to why he can't secure a unification or a big fight, but I'd certainly like to see him grab one soon if he's going to plan to move up to 168, which I imagine will probably be in the next year or so.
Yeah, I mean, particularly when you look at the middleweights that Eddie's had on the zone in the last couple of years. I mean, even like, obviously you've got Golovkin, Canelo, but even like Billy Joe Saunders was down at 160, moved up to 168. Andre could have moved to 168 and boxed Callum Smith. Even guys like Sergei Derevianchenko, who was boxing on the zone, he's still not even got those kind of, with all due respect to the opponents that he has boxed, he's still not be able to lure the big names into the ring. What was the feeling on fight week for that? Because obviously we've seen Liam Williams is generally speaking one of the more intense guys that we come across. What was he like throughout that fight week? Obviously the biggest night of his life away from home, again in difficult surroundings and different surroundings, not a seasoned bubble veteran like you traveling across the Atlantic. What was the general feeling like in fight week that week?
Liam was very confident throughout the week. Like I said, I gave him a good chance in that fight as well. I think there was a little turning point when, you know, Andrade was so cool and calm throughout the week. It got to, I think it was the press conference when he stayed cool, or he had a little switch, like he bit a bit, and I thought that made me think Andrade is not only up for this, but he's going to produce something. I don't want to say special because he wasn't special on the night, but certainly, you know, an authoritative win.
It looked special after about a minute and a half, didn't it?
Yeah.
It started the fight at a rate of knots. He came out and really stuck it on Liam Williams.
Which is always the case with him. He always starts quick and then he just fades. I don't know if that is just naturally the way, you know, takes his toll on him towards those latter rounds, or he just cruises because he knows he's in a comfortable position and he can just kind of take the fight as it comes. But that entire week, Liam was bang up for it. Liam's confident. Domingo was confident. Dom said to me, like, I don't want to talk about any other fight. I want to talk about Liam. We're here for Liam. We're here to do a job. Yeah, man, just come fight night. We saw what happened.
Yeah, he kind of comes out sometimes, Andrade, and he shows people what he's capable of, and shows his opponent what he's capable of, and sort of says, if you don't stay in your box, mate, this is going to happen to you again and again and again. And then he never really quite follows up on it. Domingo bringing his guitar with him?
He did not know. Oh. Joe was gutted by. But so I actually remember walking around. This was one thing, because the complex was so big. Again, with Miami, it was just difficult to see anyone because it was a semi bubble, so it was still open to the public, which made it even harder to find people. But I remember walking around and seeing Domingo playing on the piano with Willie Hutchinson and their masseuse, and they was just singing as well. And it was strange, but I enjoyed it.
Yeah, fight weeks have always got those little interesting bits that turn up. So then after that is when you had your big stretch. So you had that. I think that was at the end of it was end of March.
End of April, either middle of April-ish.
Yeah, I think April the 17th is I should have wrote this down, but anyway, is the date that's springing out at me. That could be wrong. Anyway, so you came back from there. Now, before we kind of go into the next, because this is your big stretch where you're out for 5 weeks. How does it impact on your day-to-day being away for that long? Obviously, being in a pandemic as well, it's a difficult time for a lot of people. I know you're very close to your family. your mum, your dad, your sister. What's that like, being away from your family and having to kind of, because it's not just your kind of conventional being away from them like we were a couple of years ago. It's very, very different. What's that like?
Well, I'm, you know, for some reason other than work, like I'm one of the worst repliers when it comes to just messaging back to people. So it's more so when I'm away, if I'm not replying, like, I think like my dad gets a little worried then, even though I'm like that when I'm back here in the UK. But like I said, I'm really like me and my dad. Like my dad's like my best mates. You know, we're really close. You know, we go to the West Brom games together. You know, we always go out for food. Like we are as tight as can be between a father and a son. But he's just there, like, take every opportunity as it comes, especially at the minute, because for all we know, hopefully not, you know, touch wood, you know, we don't go backwards from this point, but you never know where the country or the world could be in 12 months' time. So he's just there, like, with his blessing, just go and make the most of it, son, and just enjoy it as much as what you can. And obviously, as you know, like, he's pushed me non-stop from 15 to get to this point, and still pushes me now, as relentless as what he can. And then obviously, like, my mum and my sister just kind of like, my mum's just like, she don't really pay attention to what's going on. She's like, I'll go away for 5 weeks, I'll come back, and she'll be like, where have you been? And my sister, like, again, me and my sister really close, always messaging. But yeah, it's just like they just want me to go away and just make the most of it. And that 5 weeks away, it was more so, well, that kind of come out of the blue because you was meant to do the majority of it originally.
Yeah. So I was looking into at this point in time. So obviously, going back to Canelo Saunders and the NIE's, the National Interest Exemption, that was given by Donald Trump. I think a lot of people expected Trump to win again in the election, which was in January. Obviously he didn't, and then Joe Biden came in and, you know, was a lot more stringent on who could travel, how long they could travel. You had your NIE you still got it now, you get him awarded to you for 12 months, but after Joe Biden took office, it made it a lot more difficult for people to apply. I didn't know that until after I'd already booked my flights to Vegas for Canelo versus Saunders. Obviously there was other fights, and myself and you were going to kind of divide up what we were doing. And then I think it was about 4 weeks before I'd spoken.
I didn't think it was. I honestly think it's 2 weeks.
Yeah, it wasn't very long, and I'd spoken to Anthony Lever again from Matchroom, and he'd said that DAZN were having a lot of problems with getting people out for the fight from the UK bases and what have you. And then he came back to me and said, look, you and I think Coogan was another one, and a few others had been turned down for an NIE. So in a way, as disappointing as it is, obviously knowing that you're there and you're more than capable of doing it, I'm not, certainly as I've kind of done this job longer and my role has slightly changed to what it was a few years ago, I'm not as precious about the trips as much as I'd like to do them, or fight weeks or what have you, you know, knowing that I have you more than capable of doing them, it kind of takes a little bit of the pressure off. And then when Lever said, look, you can't come, it's rather than, oh God, this is terrible, it's more, okay, well, can Andy do it? If Andy can do it, then we're fine. And obviously you're in a lockdown, so you're going to be able to do it. So yeah, you were able to go out for that, which was great for you. I was still sat at home, but yeah, Canelo versus Saunders, that again had that, and for us obviously having that UK interest as well, that was a big fight. All of the shenanigans in the build up to it, which I'm sure we're going to talk about now, made for an interesting spectacle in fight week.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it was like, even though you had all that going on with the ring and, you know, the gloves and all that were being spoken about at the time, you know, the first couple of days it was like kind of a slow burner for content. But even just kind of the S&C coaches and the nutritionists who was getting on the channel, they were still doing like 15, 20,000 views on YouTube, which is more than what, if, you know, it was a normal fight back here in the UK you'd get. Because he was just, without Billy Joe doing an awful lot to promote it, his team were doing a fantastic job still, because Billy Joe was just kind of trying to stay in the shadows until he got what he wanted with his ring and any other issues were sorted out.
Did you ever think that there was any chance of a the fight not happening, the fight not going ahead, or any of that stuff that was kind of being spoken about in fight week?
I never thought about any of that. I was confident the fight was always going to happen.
Still titled every video up. Whoa, who
Yeah,
knows, guys? It might not be.
got those clicks in.
Hey, we got come on, it's a pandemic, guys. Anyway, getting out there. What was that like? Because obviously Billy Joe had his Greg Marriott. Obviously had Tom Saunders. I think the week before we went, I had Mark Tibbs, obviously a big friend of the channel.
I think it was a day after I come back from Andrade Williams, and you said to me, "Oh, Andy, I know you've just come back, but can you do this interview because you couldn't?"
So I had So Mark Tibbs messaged me, and he was obviously over in Las Vegas at the time, and he messaged me very late and said, "Rob, can you do an interview with Billy Joe Saunders' dad, Tom, who I've never spoken to before. I've never met him before. We've got some issues with the judges, with the ring, and blah blah blah." And at the time, I thought it was just issues with the judges and the ring. And he'd asked to do the interview, I think at 5 p.m. UK time. And I was actually buying my daughter's first bike at the time, and he tried to change the time. So I ended up changing it to you, and then he changed it with you again, and then eventually you ended up getting it done, which was the infamous Tom Saunders roast of Eddie Hearn, which was, I think, 20 minutes of him just really laying into Eddie and talking about Eddie not doing this and not honouring the contract and the judging and the this and the that. So that was a good start to a fight week out there.
Yeah, I mean, that was just kind of great to get that going, and it just kind of built into the week, really. I think, like I said, it was for some reason, it was just that slow burner. The only thing which kind of was frustrating for that week was just because he didn't get anything else extra with Billy. You know, he gave me a couple of minutes, but he didn't really do anything, and that was the only disappointing thing, because he said himself, you know, he was frustrated that British media weren't over there.
Yeah, I think that there was that was one of the parts of the interview with Tom Saunders where he was talking about, you know, we're not allowed our own media out here and they're stopping this. And obviously Coogan and Billy Joe are very good friends over the years, and I know Coogan really wanted to be out for that, but it wasn't Eddie Hearn who was stopping people going out there. It was Joe Biden. But yeah, fight week itself, what was Canelo like? Because we saw a little bit of spice from Canelo. I think we saw it on fight night as well. It kind of, as it built throughout the week. But was there a difference between the Canelo that you'd encountered for Canelo Smith and Canelo Yildirim and the Canelo that you saw for Canelo Saunders?
Yeah, for as weird as it sounds, he just had a lot more of a fired up look in his eyes. Like, he just looked like he wanted fight night to come sooner rather than later, because he was saying through the week in various interviews he was going to teach Billy Joe a lesson, and obviously we saw what happened with Billy Joe and the injury he sustained. And I don't think anybody wishes it on anyone or wanted to harm anyone in the ring, but I think Canelo wanted to put Billy Joe in his place because of the build-up, the trash talk, you know, the name-calling, all of it, and the messing about with the ring and what have you. I think and also obviously the altercations in the hotel lobby and what have you. I think it got to a point where Canelo was there like, you're going to see a different side to me on Saturday night. Similarly
to Canelo Smith, everybody seemed, obviously it wasn't out there, but everybody seemed pretty confident on Billy Joe Saunders' side.
100%. Like, had even more of a confident feeling from Billy Joe than what I had anybody else, because he's always been relaxed and confident no matter who he's fighting. He's always had that same aura, and I think him getting Tyson out there as well. I think Tyson arrived on the Wednesday, and when Tyson arrived, everything just blew up then. He was like, jeez, I was carrying my camera everywhere with me because you just never knew what would kick off, and you didn't want to be the one to miss it. And then Tyson gets there, and Tyson brings his own aura, which I think Tyson getting there took it away from Canelo. So then not as many people are focusing on Canelo. They're also looking at Tyson thinking like, oh, Tyson's here, you know, world heavyweight champion. So it kind of worked in Billy Joe's favour to have some of the shine taken away from Canelo in the build up to that fight.
Was there, I heard rumours about drawings on the wall and Canelo's posters being defaced and stuff like that?
I don't know who, but I think somebody from Billy Joe's team had drew over one of the Canelo posters from the fight. Well, the Canelo Saunders poster just drew over Canelo. Yeah.
It all sounds so silly, but all is fair in love and war, as they say. You mentioned kind of that different look in Canelo's eye, the kind of the fire in his eye on fight night, throughout the week. What was it like on fight night? Because that was a packed out. That was fully boxing is back. I mean, that must have been an unbelievable atmosphere to be involved in, but like at any time, but particularly at a time where you're used to watching boxing behind closed doors or boxing with a small audience and stuff like that. Just describe what that was like. How quickly did it fill up? Was it packed early? Because obviously we see in America sometimes from fights that we've traveled to where people are sort of making their way to the seats during the ring walk really for the main event. They're not really too interested in the undercard. What was it like on fight night there?
That's the best atmosphere I've experienced in the sport, because it was 73,000 that was announced, but it felt like double. Like, but again, the fans for Canelo go crazy, and the noise, like I could feel like my ears were like popping. I've just never known anything like it. And you see my fans do the Mexican waves, and throwing balloons, not balloons, but the inflatables like being blown up and thrown about, and it was just like, honestly, it's the best atmosphere I've ever seen at a live boxing event. Topples everything by a country mile, because it felt like there was 150,000 fans in there. Just everybody was screaming and cheering, and then Billy Joe comes walking out to these boos ringing around, and it was just something that I'll never ever forget. Just again, just thinking to how difficult it's been to watch shows, whether you've been there or not, without fans or with limited capacities, to then go and see 73,000 fans there. Like, he just blew my mind at how amazing that atmosphere was.
What about the fight? How did you feel? How did you see the fight? How did you feel the fight was unfolding at the time of the stoppage?
So I had Canelo 5-3 up at the end of the 8th. I could have argued 4-4 because I had one close. I thought Billy Joe was boxing well, but I thought Canelo was just, in the last couple of rounds before it, I thought Canelo was starting to break him down a bit. The thing that surprised me most watching it was Canelo was landing to the body a lot earlier than what I thought he was. Just from the first round, he's had to start working to the body.
He was really sinking him in that first round, yeah.
Billy Joe just unfortunately got caught with that eye injury when he did, but I just looked at him and I was there thinking he's breaking him down, and gradually I thought he was going to lose on points, Billy Joe, at that point when I was just seeing those last couple of rounds how it was working out. But like I say, it was very close before obviously he couldn't come back out for that 9th.
Did you notice the injury straight away?
I didn't know what was going on, so I just saw them. I'm just watching it, and I just saw Billy Joe boxing, and like nobody ringside was saying anything, so we're just watching it. Gets to the end of the round, he walks back, and then I just see the white arms being waved. I was thinking, what's going on here? And then obviously you're seeing people saying on social media he quit. Obviously we didn't know what was going on. We didn't know about the eye injury. So then he's kind of just you're reading everything on Twitter without seeing the official stuff. So it's kind of a balancing act. Usually, fight's finished, go get your post fights. Whoever you see ring, sort of grab them. Can I grab 2 minutes with you? But we didn't really know what the injury was, which made it a bit more difficult to say, do you think Billy Joe quit or not?
Yeah, there was a lot of, whenever somebody retires on the stool or takes a knee or whatever you want to call it, there's always the Q word gets thrown about afterwards. Just going back to the injury, I remember like you can miss things like that randomly, depending on where you're sat in the ring. You can miss stuff. Like, I remember watching Groves Eubank, and I didn't see George's shoulder come out, and I was thinking for the last round, like last half of the round, I was thinking, what's George going to throw the right hand? And then when I watched it back, I was like, oh, that's why he wasn't throwing the right hand. So you can miss stuff like that. Any interesting interviews that you grabbed from there afterwards? I know like it's difficult because they all blend together. Obviously, by the time you're doing them, it's 5 o'clock in the morning for us. But I know across the course of your Canelo events, you got obviously mentioned Jay Balvin, Jorge Masvidal made an appearance on the channel. What fight was that? Can you remember which fight that was?
Jorge Masvidal was after Canelo Yildirim.
Yeah, that had a bit more of a party vibe, didn't it? There was a lot of people who came out for that and had that kind of party atmosphere. After Canelo Saunders, you had a little bit of a break. Was it after then?
Yes,
so
it was
from Texas
to Vegas.
So you flew out to Vegas. I think there was the week, wasn't there?
Yeah.
There was the week. What did you get up to in that week? What can you tell us that you got up to that week?
I'll keep this PG. That for me was the most rewarding week out of any of them, because we'd gone to Vegas. That was the week there was no show. Well, technically it was 10 days till the Taylor Ramirez bubble. So obviously I had a day or two off on the back of Canelo Saunders, just gallivanting around Vegas. And at the time as well in Vegas, so in Texas there's no mask policy. So everything's just effectively back to normal. Vegas was pretty much the same. It was down to your own discretion whether you wanted to or not. So the reason we're going off topic there, but going back to kind of that week, that was the most rewarding one because we turned up. There's no fight week content, whereas obviously if you're going into a fight week, you know you're going to get content. Everyone's just going to come to you. So through the contacts that we have out there, who I was reaching out to, you know, the first day, obviously I've got shout out to Sean and Kenny Porter, who are
Sean Porter, big boxing social man.
Like Sean Porter, I've said it on numerous occasions, like, and Kenny, just two of the best people I know in boxing. They're fantastic. And I messaged Kenny and I said, you know, I'm out here, can I link up with you guys? Like, yeah, we'll you know, come over to the gym. He said that they had a guy sparring Teofimo Lopez. So basically Kenny arranged for me to interview Sean, interviewed him back at his house afterwards, but Teofimo was there, and they arranged for me to interview Teofimo as well, and Teofimo Senior. So first day I get there, when I'm actually working, you got Sean Porter, Kenny Porter, Teofimo Senior, Teofimo Junior. I think there was one other which I'm forgetting off the top of my head, and you had pad work as well. And it's just like 5 big names in the first day, and it just built from there. You know,
Haney shortly afterwards.
Haney shortly after. Michael Hunter on the back of it, pulling out of Hergovic. Ishmael Salas, Luis Arias just before the Herd fight. There were just loads of people who we was able to get, and just shout out to, you know, Mario Serrano,
Mental Mario,
Ryan Recton, obviously Sean and Kenny Porter. Even if I forget anybody, then I apologise. But just everybody was just fantastic in trying to help me whilst I was out there, and just to see those names on the channel, especially Teofimo, who hadn't been doing those types of interviews for a while. I know he'd done a couple post fights if people caught him, but he did 15 minutes with me, which was just like great for us to have that type of content going until the Ramirez-Taylor bubble started.
When did you get Arum around the Fury Wilder stuff? Was that 10 days?
So that was in that.
That was in that 10 days.
We did that. Was it in that 10 days? It was. Yeah, it was. It was just before. So I think I did it on the Wednesday. And then, no, sorry, I did it on the Tuesday, and then I had a press conference on Thursday for Ramirez-Taylor. So went to do the interview with Bob Arum. Shout out Evan Corn, who also arranged that.
Yeah.
Went to do it, and then we was filming
boxers watching TikToks.
Boxers watching TikToks with him. So we did like 3 or 4, and his phone started going off. I said to him, "Do you want to get that?" Bob? He's like, "Yeah, we need to finish this now, mate. I need to take this." So I was packing up in his office, and all I heard was, "Holy fuck!" And it instantly clicked in my head. I was like, "That's definitely about the Wilder arbitration," because everybody was telling me the news is coming soon. So then I left the room. I remember messaging you, like, "Listen, I've just heard Bob say that. I don't know for sure, but I'm 99% Wilder's going to have won this arbitration." So you say, like, get that interview up whilst it's still relevant.
Because we'd had it's obviously Chris McKenna was the journalist who broke the story in the UK. Chris McKenna is obviously a good friend of ours. And he was the one who broke the story. I think Dan Raphael had put out something a couple of days before saying that the arbitration, the outcome was due, and then Chris broke the story. And I remember messaging Evan at the time saying, "Can Andy go back in and do 5 minutes?" And Evan went, "No, he can't."
Yeah, it was literally like we'd just finished. I'd uploaded it, and within 2 minutes of it going live, it just broke everywhere.
Well, it made the interview do pretty well, to be fair.
I mean, we still kind of titled it.
Yeah, don't worry about that. That's fine.
But it was just like I still hung around in the office. Now Evan's just there, like, "I know what you're trying to do, mate." I was like, "I'm not doing anything. I'm just just uploading a few things." Just Bob happens to walk out.
Yeah, Evan is a wise old fox in his role, as you have to be working in PR. But yeah, that was an interesting moment. We actually have the video still. I'm sure we can probably dig it out at some point of Bob Arum. I think he was watching, wasn't he watching a guy pick up a lion or something like that? Something stupid.
I think it was that one, yeah.
He was watching somebody pick up a lion, and then he said, "I don't want to watch this anymore." And then turned away. Holy fuck. That'd be a good clip to get out. Ramirez-Taylor. Obviously Josh Taylor, somebody well known to the social over the years. We have a great relationship with him. Kind of been there throughout his ascent to undisputed champion. that must have been an interesting fight week as well. He's very much the away fighter there, it felt like, certainly from conversations that I've had with Josh and the things that he said in the past. What was the whole fight week like that week? Being back in Vegas as well, obviously under slightly different circumstances. I think that was again an open bubble.
Yeah, it was an open bubble, and it's like you say, there was very much the feel that Josh was the away fighter, but the way that he actually conducted himself throughout the week, you would have thought the opposite. You would have thought that he's the home fighter, because Ramirez kind of kept himself to himself and was very quiet kind of throughout the build up to it. And there was a lot of talk about as to whether or not Ramirez was struggling to make the weight, and I was just thinking something's going on. So there was a lot of talk about that, and Josh throughout the week was fantastic. Obviously, went to see him on the Sunday when I got there. And there was also at the time, there's a lot of talk about Mark Tibbs and Ben Davison, so we had all that going on. So then we just went to the house, and Josh was fantastic with me. And I've only interviewed Josh once previously. I know you've got a brilliant relationship with him. Ryan has, from when he used to work with Cyclone. But I don't really have any pre-existing kind of relationship with him, because I've never really had to deal with him. And he was fantastic. We'll come on to it, but even post-fight, he invited me up to the room to do an interview, and there's only me and Andy McCart from IFL who were there to do it.
Yeah, Josh is, as you mentioned, Ryan used to work for Cyclone, so he's known him for a long time. I've known him through Ryan initially, and then obviously since then. He seems, well, I say he seems, so I know, he's very much... in fight week, he becomes a different type of Scotsman. I think I tweeted something, words to the effect of he's the Scotsman even the Scotsmen are afraid of, Josh Taylor. What was he like in fight week? I always feel like, from my experiences with him, that he gets slightly more intense as the minutes roll on, really, towards fight night. And obviously we saw that after the weigh-in when there was a little bit of a kerfuffle.
100%. He was just so eager for fight. He was just fired up. He just wanted it to come around sooner rather than later. And you could see I think he was frustrated by the fact he was seen as the away fighter, and he was obviously ranked as the number one heading into the fight. And I think all of those little things annoyed him slightly, and he was there and he wanted to make a statement and produced a near enough punch perfect display at that level in an undisputed title fight. He was just continuing to get more and more fired up, and he had some altercations with Jose Ramirez's manager.
Rick Meridian. Yeah.
Which was interesting to see. But like Josh, he just wanted to scrap anyone by that point. Obviously, he kicked off by the lifts when Josh was trying to head back up to his room. And then Dean White said as well.
Baby Ting finding himself in the mix, which was an interesting thing.
Right, Dean is everywhere. Dean gets places water can't,
He quarantined for 2 weeks in Mexico to get in there for that fight. That is commitment. Fair play to him.
But again, Dean's fantastic. Shout out to Dean White. We did something a couple of days ago again.
Yeah.
And yeah, he was just there to, he was like Josh's bodyguard for the rest of that week. And then, after the fight, he was organising, where Josh was going to go for his after party, and he was just making sure he didn't kick off with anyone. He was fantastic.
Yeah. I always find with Josh Taylor, it's similar to, have you seen The Last Dance?
Yes.
Michael Jordan documentary.
Yeah.
I feel like Josh has that part of him where he kind of sees something and takes it personally and just keeps magnifying it in his head and makes it more and more and more of a problem as it gets up to the fight night, but obviously channels it in a good way where it hasn't yet impacted on his performance. But I've always thought there's a similar sort of mindset where he kind of, somebody will say something quite innocuous that doesn't really mean anything, and he'll hear it and take it like, I remember watching the first interview that you'd done with him, and kind of underneath him saying, well, it's Ramirez Taylor, it should be fucking Taylor Ramirez. And then you could see that in his head, and like you could imagine him sitting around and really festering on that and stewing on that. He's that type of person. You mentioned the fight itself, a lot closer on the cards than certainly I had it. Surprised that Josh Taylor didn't get the stoppage.
It was one of them, so I can't remember if it was the first knockdown or the second knockdown now, but obviously, Kenny Bayless gave him longer.
I think both knockdowns he got the benefit of the doubt. He got quite a long count for both of them, particularly the second one where he was badly hurt.
Yeah, and I know it was the second one. Then people are trying to say, Kenny Bayless was argued trying to separate them, and then Josh landed the shot. But at the same time, you're always told keep your hands up, protect yourself at all times. And Josh has capitalised on that, and fair play. He made the most of it. I think it's bad to look at it and think if he didn't get those 2 knockdowns, it would have been a draw. That shocks me because I comfortably had Josh winning that fight, probably 116, 112 at best, if not 117, 111. That's probably as close as I could have called it. No disrespect to Ramirez, great fighter, put up as good a fight as he can, but them 2 knockdowns just kind of killed it for him.
He's fighting Jack Catterall next, who's somebody else that you know well, obviously through your connections with Jamie Moore. How do you see that fight going? Come on, mate.
Mate, I've got splinters. I try not to. It's hard not to think Josh will be.
I think he's rightly a favourite going into the fight. I feel like I'll take this one for you. I'm better at these ones than you are. I think it's right that Josh Taylor will go into the fight as a sizable favourite. He's the undisputed champion, but I think a lot of people are overlooking Jack Catterall. Jack Catterall's a very crafty fighter. He's got good power. And I could see him frustrating Josh Taylor for the first few rounds of the fight, for sure. I do expect Josh Taylor to come out victorious, but I do feel like, certainly in America, who's Jack Catterall, blah, 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 blah. Jack Catterall spent time in camps with Miguel Cotto, Floyd Mayweather, when he was kind of making his way as a prospect early on in his career. So Jack Catterall's been around the block, and he knows how to handle himself in the ring. It's just unfortunate on his end, or I'm sure he won't look at it like that, but he is facing an elite pound-for-pound level champion. He's not facing a belt holder. He's facing the real thing, the number one in the division. So I think it's fair to say that Josh Taylor will probably be the favourite. Well, there's no probably. He will be the favourite going into the fight. But yeah, I do feel like Jack Catterall is being overlooked in some quarters.
I echo those words.
Well done, Andy. Yes, very good from you there. And I don't really go to Jamie Moore's gym anyway, so Jack Catterall can't hit me.
I'll take one for the team when he sees me.
Disregarding is probably the wrong word. Putting Jack Catterall versus Josh Taylor to one side for the minute. Let's just say that ends in a technical draw after 2 rounds. Who would you like to see Josh Taylor fight? Kind of the world's his oyster at the minute.
It depends on whether if he wanted to stay at 140 after that, or if he wanted to move up. I know he's spoken how much he'd love to have fought Pacquiao. I don't think that's
not going to happen anymore.
There's just no interest there. If he was at 140, sorry, I'd love to see the Tank fight. I'd just love to see him fight Tank. But then Mikey Garcia at 140 again would be...
Teofimo Lopez at 140. So you've got all of those 135s who can move up.
Exactly. I put 147. I'd like to see the Crawford fight. I think the Crawford fight is a very tough fight, especially now Crawford's adjusted to 147. But it's a tough fight, which if Josh is on it, he can win. I think Spence is a much more difficult... Well, depending on obviously how Spence recovers now from his eye injury and what have you. I think the Crawford one for me is one which I'd most like to see at 147. But at 140, either Mikey or Tank.
Personally, I'd like to see I won't put you in a predicament and ask who's going to win out of Terence Crawford and your mate Sean Porter. But I would like to see the Terence Crawford fight. But from kind of some kind of taking my fans' hat off, I think Josh Taylor stay at 140. You've got those 135 guys moving up. You mentioned Gervonta Davis. I think he's moving back down to 135 now. But still, it won't be long before he looks back up at 140. Looked really good against Barrios. You've got Teofimo Lopez, undisputed versus undisputed. It's a great fight. Devin Haney, by all accounts, doesn't have much time left at 135. Can't get those fights at 135 for whatever reason. If he moves up, all roads to the gold lead to Josh Taylor. So I think, I would personally like to see him stay at 140 and probably feast on the lightweights that are moving up from 135.
I suppose it just depends on how much longer Josh feels like he can stay at 140, because I remember hearing a few rumours that he maybe had 2 or 3 fights left before he wanted to move up to 147. To be honest, when you are undisputed champion, you don't really have anything left to achieve. So he could have big purses, he could fight big names and have some big paydays, but I think ultimately Josh cares more about... He's won a few fighters, you can say he wants to become a champion. He wants the gold.
And I think that would be the reason for him to move up as well. I don't see him having to move, although I did see his first day of training yesterday, or Josh Taylor joining the Dad Bod gang. But I don't think he would move up to 147 because obviously in theory he would, but I don't think when he moves up to 147 it's because he can't make the weight anymore. I think it will be, as you say, to go and chase a 2-weight world champion, to go and beat a Terence Crawford or a Sean Porter. So we're obviously interrupted there by the fire alarm. Everybody's okay, and he didn't turn the heating up again. Haney Linares, what was that like, that fight week?
We were just obviously talking about it, and I was just going to say it was open bubble then. So
Explain to people the difference between an open bubble, a bubble, no bubble, yeah, there's various different bubbles here.
a bubble is you cannot leave, a fighter cannot leave, nobody can come in, nobody can come out. You have to do your test, stay in your room. Positive, you leave. Negative, you can stay. A semi bubble is it's you go in, you do your test negative, you sound, but it's it's open to the public as well. So the public's staying there, but as long as you've done your negative test, you're okay. And then an open bubble is basically just normal. Like,
Just Texas.
yeah,
just
roam around, mate. Do what you want. We don't care.
Was Haney Linares the fight week that you were spending with Conor Ben?
It was. Shout out Conor Ben. Don't know how much we can talk about, but kind of like that's like the first time I've spent. One of the most important things with these trips, it's not just the content; it's building your contacts and building your relationships. And me and Conor were both 24, and that's the first time I've ever spent time with him. So obviously he'd gone out to see and support Martin Ward, who unfortunately didn't have a rub of a green on the night against Fuzile. But me and Conor, we went out for a couple of nights, not out, but just kind of gallivanting around at the casinos until maybe 1-ish, and then just heading back to our rooms. But it was just nice to get to know Conor more away from the camera, and I think it was kind of not resented. It was resonated with him to see what I'm like, not to see the journalist, just to see effectively just a normal 24-year-old lad, and just to kind of build that relationship, which is great to see. Like, I still speak to Conor now. He's away at the minute, and he did 5 minutes Zoom with me when he's away on holiday on the back of the Granados fight. It's just great to kind of build those relationships, and it was what I just wanted to loop back to, because it was a funny story for me. When I remember I was in Mandalay Bay going down, and I can't remember who jumped out of the lift, but I just said, I'll see you later, mate. And there was this girl was in there from Hawaii who was on vacation, and she just turned around, like, she heard me speak, and she was like, "Oh my God, where are you from? You've got this amazing accent." I was like, "I'm from Birmingham in England, it's not that amazing." And she's like, "Oh,
From Langley Green."
Cheers, Rob, all my fans are going to Langley. So yeah, she turned around to me and she said, "Would you mind if I filmed you and sent a video back to my family in Hawaii?" So I was looking around like the lift, like, okay. So she got a forward-facing selfie video on. She got her in it, got me in it. I'm just there like, "Hello, people of Hawaii. I hope everybody's okay. I hope the weather's better there than what it is back in England. Even though I'm in Vegas." And that was pretty much it. I was like, "Have a good day." And yeah, that was just like such a strange experience. But being English over there at the minute, it's like everybody just wants to hear you talk.
It's always good at any time, but I'm imagining during a time where there's pretty much no English people in America, or certainly no people traveling to America, it's even more so.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, just.
And you don't even have a proper English accent.
Birmingham accent, like I say, it's the best accent in America at the minute. Everybody loves me. It's like I walk past, and if I'm on my phone or something, and just everyone turns and looks at you, like thinking, "Where's this guy from?" Thinking I'm from, I'm a UFO or something. It's amazing. Like the British accent goes a long way out there.
So Haney Linares, let's quickly talk about the fight. What did you make of the fight on the night?
Fantastic performance from Devin until he got clocked. Those last few rounds, it was interesting to see how he was going to deal with kind of getting clocked for the first time. Obviously, I remember Linares doing the whole back to his corner.
Sent him back on wobbly legs. Yeah.
Just a shame, really. He couldn't push a bit more just to see how Devin would have reacted if Linares was able to pressure him that touch more. But it was very good performance from Haney. His jab is razor sharp. It's his best asset. It's fantastic when it's on point. But yeah, like we saw him got wobbled maybe against a better fighter with more questions to be asked.
You went to watch him spar while you were over there as well, didn't you? I've been over to watch him spar at City Gym a few times. Always a good experience. I always find those little pockets of trips to be the most rewarding sometimes. Where you get to go over and you get to see them away from the cameras, and sometimes they're working on something, sometimes they've done a lot of S&C during the day, and they're not as sharp or what have you in sparring. What's that whole experience like? Not just for Devin Haney. I know you've watched other fighters while you were over there. You watched Ugas spar before the Pacquiao fight and what have you. Those little bits of the trips I always find to be the best bits.
Yeah, 100%, because it's for stuff that nobody else sees, and it also gives you, because it's so close to the fight, that's when you imagine you're going to see them at the best of the sharpest, because they're gearing up now. And Ugas was on fight week. Haney was the week before his fight. I saw Teofimo spar, he had nothing obviously lined up. So that was when August 14th was meant to happen, but obviously it didn't. So you're seeing them spar, and it's just interesting to see what they're working on, what their weak points are, and what they're doing in particular well, what they've maybe looked to bring into their game for their upcoming fights, just to kind of deal with the skill sets of their opponents. And it's those little things which gave you an indication as to how the fight could play out because of how they want to approach it.
So from there, from Vegas back to Miami, Andy the man in Miami. That's what, 3 Miami trips in like 6 months, 7 months. God, it must have been a great time. Mayweather-Logan Paul, which is not something I think it's fair to say any of us would have expected to happen a couple of years ago, but now seems like events like that are becoming more and more the norm. What was that like? I bet that was an interesting fight week.
It was interesting, but that was a difficult fight week for content. So I obviously remember, so they had the initial grand arrivals from Floyd and Logan, and they did huddles. So I can't remember who it was, but somebody from PBC was just walking around, Showtime rather, was walking around and just telling everyone in the front row, we've got something going on with Jake and Tyron, because we'd announced the Jake Paul Tyron Woodley fight going on at the 5th Street gym. Now, I was at the back of a huddle throughout, just holding up my tripod, my camera on top, praying it didn't fall off, but nobody had told me that was going on. So I'm there editing away, and then you've messaged me like, what's going on?
Where are you?
Like, I'm still at this Mayweather thing, editing, uploading. It's like, well, everyone's there, get over there. Obviously, he never got back to me. I spoke to Greg about it. He just said he apologised because he never told me. So then we turned up, and thankfully one of the other media guys gave me at least a head-to-head of Tyron and Jake.
You said was like done on his phone or something, wasn't it?
Yeah. So it wasn't the best, but it was better than nothing at that stage.
We made some good money off that. So whoever that was, thanks very much. That did a good job.
So that was Ellie Setbacks guy. I can't remember his name now. I've seen all his fights, but it was Ellie Setbacks.
I haven't seen him in a while. Tyler.
Yeah,
Tyler, really good guy. Yeah, really good guy. And Setback is also a really good guy.
100%. So like Tyler gave it to me. Obviously used that, and then I saw Greg the next day, and Greg was really apologetic. And I remember, so it was the undercard press conference. So I was sat down editing, everybody left, and someone runs past me saying, Jake's on his way in, Jake's on his way in. I'm there thinking, Jake who? Like, everyone's making a big thing. I was thinking, I can do something with Jake. So I just went over to Greg. I was like, is Jake coming in, like as in Jake Paul coming in now? And he said, he is. I said, look, mate, listen, didn't get anything yesterday. Is there any chance you could have a word with him? Let me get a couple minutes with him. He was like, I'll see what I can do, mate. You're here, you didn't get him yesterday. I'll try and sort something. So Jake and Tyron were doing their bits behind the scenes, their promos and that ahead of the fight. And then he walked out, and Greg just said to me, come and set up here. I'll sort you out, with him. So Greg said to Jake, listen, Andy, Boxing Social from the UK. And Jake recognised us. Jake was there like, oh, how you been? It's been, last time I would have seen you was when Logan fought KSI. So he remembers us. Yeah. So Greg's like, yeah, just 2 minutes. I was like, 5 minutes later.
Every PR guy knows what that means as well. Yeah, 2 minutes, mate. Yeah, sure. 8 minutes.
We milked it like 5 minutes, and I think we clipped everything. And the numbers on that, like, I think he did 400,000 views on YouTube, and across socials, the numbers were massive. And
people don't understand what a juggernaut he is. Like, digitally, he's unbelievable. Like, people can say what they want about us covering it. We're not going to stop. It's going to continue to happen. I'm just going to be really honest. I'm not going to lie like other people and, pick and choose which parts we say we like and we don't like. If it makes money, it makes sense. Jake Paul is massive. He's an absolute superstar across. I mean, they're like the modern day movie stars, aren't they, nowadays? You look at polls. I remember watching or reading a poll where it said, what do kids want to be when they grow up? When we were growing up, it was footballer, actor. Now it's YouTuber, content creators, and stuff like that. So they are the superstars of the modern day. What's he like before the camera goes on, Jake Paul and Logan Paul? Because I know that you've met both of them.
Very polite, very well mannered. You know, people might have differing views, but with me away from the cameras have been fantastic. You know, they're approachable, they'll speak to you. They're amazing to kind of talk to and on a one-to-one aspect away from an interview. Jake, like I say, makes a lot of time for everyone, and we obviously will go to it with his most recent fight with Tyron. But yeah, both of them are fantastic.
I think that's part of, like you mentioned about Canelo Alvarez as well. Like once you reach reaching a certain level of fame and notoriety is one thing, and having a great relationship with the media or being accessible and giving the media something, it will always help. I mean, obviously he's a massive superstar. He doesn't need fucking Boxing Social to make himself a big star. He already is. But, continuing that professionalism, I guess, really does help people. The fight itself, Mayweather versus Logan Paul, yeah, interesting. You've got like 40-year-old Floyd or 42-year-old. How old was he at the time? 44?
44, I think, yeah.
Against 0-1 professional Logan Paul. How did you find it on the night?
Well, I was up in the box, so we were just watching it on the TVs, and you just take it for what it is. You can't be too serious about these things. They're there to entertain. Floyd's come back, whether it's a prime Floyd or a past it Floyd who's probably barely trained in the build up to that fight. I've still been able to say that I have been there to see Floyd fight regardless. Same with Manny Pacquiao. It is what it is. I thought there was one point when Logan seemed to catch Floyd, and then there was one point when Floyd caught Logan and he seemed to be holding him up with all his might. Yeah, he's just taking it for what it is. It was just a bit of fun, really. But the undercard, some brilliant fights. Like Arias versus Hurd was fantastic.
Yeah, that was a good fight. That was a surprising fight as well. We've covered both of them over the years. Jarrett Hurd. I mean, Jarrett Hurd boxed Jason Wellborn on the Wilder Fury 1 undercard. Do you remember that? God, that feels like a long time ago we were there watching that. Okay, we're going to try and push on through these because we've been talking for a little while here. You mentioned Pacquiao Ugas, which was Pacquiao Spence, of course, until the week before. I remember being with you in Birmingham. I'd come over to see you after I had a couple of meetings, didn't I, in Nottingham, and then came over from there to Birmingham to go for a coffee with you and get something to eat and stuff. And we were kind of planning out the week, and we were looking for aeroplane tickets, which we won't talk about. And I remember, I think I literally just said to you at the time, have you seen the odds on Errol Spence to stop Manny Pacquiao? Because I think he was 12-5 to stop him, and I really fancied that. And then as soon as the words left my mouth, we got a press release to come through to say that Spence had injured his eye and was replaced by Yordenis Ugas, which obviously not the fight that we'd planned on, but still a good fight on paper, and it transpired on the night when Ugas was obviously victorious. But, I mean, we don't know what's going to happen with Manny Pacquiao, whether or not that's going to be the last time we see him in the ring. But still, a great thing for you to tick off on your bucket list, the fact that you saw not only Mayweather, all right, Mayweather was against Logan Paul, wasn't a proper fight, but you got to be there potentially for the last fight of Manny Pacquiao's career.
Yeah, 100%. This again is just something you'll never forget, and it was hard to watch because shout out PBC, they gave me a very good seat to watch. Ken
Buhari, I hope I said your name right. I've never had to pronounce it on air before, but yes, big up King Kenny as we call him over at PBC. But anyway, continue. I'd like to give everybody a name drop on the Boxing Social podcast.
Yeah, so like watching it, and you could just see like Manny's throwing these amazing 4 or 5 punch combinations, but getting nowhere near landing on Ugas, and his timing's off, his footwork wasn't the same, and whenever Ugas was landing, Ugas only needed to throw 1 or 2 punches for every 10 punches that Pacquiao would throw, but he was always landing, and when he was landing, from my view, he was sending Pacquiao flying backwards, and he was just kind of sad to see because from again my view, it seemed like the speed was there with his hand speed was still there. He just wasn't getting his time, wasn't landing anything. But that entire fight week was just a struggle for content. There wasn't much going on. It was difficult to build a buzz about it because you had WWE on the same night. You had SummerSlam at the Allegiant, which is when you got to Thursday night, Vegas was just flooded by WWE fans. Like, I've never seen so many people walking around with belts strapped around their shoulders. It was just a scene to behold.
Like a WBA convention.
Pretty, yeah. I don't think they'll take kindly to that now. If you're cutting back.
That's all right. We've got the WBC here. We don't need the WBA. One thing I do want to talk to you about, we've mentioned the fact that you saw Ugas spar on the Tuesday. Now, obviously, a lot of talk in the fight week was dominated by Ugas's arm injury, the fact that he had a swollen bicep. You saw him spar on the Tuesday. I'll ask you about that in a minute. But let's be honest. We spoke throughout the week. I like a bet on the fight, and I kind of looked at his arm and thought that doesn't look right, like a lot of people thought. What was the situation with the injury? Because when we'd spoken about it, and obviously you had kind of going back to what we were speaking about earlier with watching the sessions, and obviously you're not allowed to film the sessions, but being behind, I mean, on the Tuesday ahead of the fight, so you're kind of 4 or 5 days out. From your vantage point and from what you were being told in the gym, there was a problem.
There's a number of things which kind of I saw, and I have no doubt that there was an issue. It just didn't seem to I don't know whether it was just adrenaline took over on the night or he was able to power through. But watching him spar, firstly, he's in his sweatsuit still, and he did look tired. He looked a bit gaunt. And when you got to the press conference, he didn't want to talk to anyone. He literally did this little huddle. He was talking really quietly, bringing his voice down. Didn't really seem interested by any of it. Almost as if he was in awe of just being able to fight Manny Pacquiao. And then I had somebody inform me that there was an issue with his arm, which obviously I told you, and I'd have backed because it was somebody who...
It was somebody from within Ugas's team.
Obviously, I don't want to start getting...
No, sure, yeah.
But yeah, I had been informed about it, so... On fight night, I don't know if maybe there was... I haven't watched it back, but did it look like there was an issue with his bicep?
Didn't look like there was any problems with him.
I don't know if I've just been played like an absolute kipper or if he's just got in there and thought, forget it, I'm just going to put it on him now.
I think, you make a good point about the adrenaline. He might have had a shot or something on the night. Obviously, everything completely legitimate, of course. Not making any accusations, Mr. Ugas. But yeah, I mean, there's a number of reasons why it could potentially have been okay on the night. And also, we didn't really get to see the Manny Pacquiao that we certainly against Keith Thurman or the Manny Pacquiao we'd seen from years before. So maybe it wasn't as big a problem because the threat wasn't as much. Who knows?
No, 100%. And it'll be interesting to see what happens next with Ugas. Like we were speaking about potential opponents for Taylor earlier. Most winnable fight for him at 147 would be Ugas. Like no disrespect to Ugas, and obviously credit where credit's due for his win, but if you was moving up, you would consider that one as probably the most winnable belt available. Yeah,
I know they've done some sparring in the past as well, which kind of reared its head a couple of weeks ago. He's done some sparring with Sean Porter as well in the Porter Performance Institute or whatever they call it, the Porter
Performance.
That's it, Porter High Performance Center in Las Vegas. What was Vegas like around that time? Because obviously you're a couple of months removed from bubbles, semi-bubbles. I'd imagine that was a little bit more open.
Well, it was different. So, firstly, masks were mandatory again, walking around everywhere. So I haven't got an agenda anyway. Masks just obviously wearing takes its toll on you when you're wearing.
Been wearing it for 6 of 12 months, pretty much. Yeah.
So obviously that was back, and so one thing which it was good to learn. So I remember I've only covered one fight pre-lockdown, pre-COVID in Vegas, which was Wilder Ortiz 2, and from fights you've covered, and you'll know usually in the MGM you have the media room and you've got the radio row around the back. So there's always people you can grab and they'll bring in fighters to do stuff with radio. So I remember Wilder Ortiz too. Was bringing Wilder in. I'd never had a chance to get him, but others were able to. Chris Eubank was there, Junior was there, Leo Santa Cruz. Everybody was knocking about. This time round, they said that because of restrictions, they're not allowed to bring anybody into the room. So it was literally maybe Dan Raphael, so your written journalist who you might be able to grab, or some broadcast journalists, and that was literally it. There was no radio row. Keith Thurman came in after the weigh-in. He was the only one. And Freddie Roach, and it was literally them two, and that was it. So I think that's kind of a good little bit of knowledge to know, just in case Fury Wilder 3 happens to be the same.
Yeah. Yeah, it's, I think also as well, had it have been Spence, I think maybe we could have seen some more people there in fight week. Obviously, that's sort of the things we have to weigh up. Obviously, at this time, well, we thought everything was booked at that time for Pacquiao Ugas. So you can't. It's a bit too late to back out now. But yeah, had Spencer been fighting, potentially we could have get some more people there on fight night. Right, the final trip. Well, the final trip that you've covered. Obviously, you've got some coming up. Is your man Jake Paul again? Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley. The circus returned to town, this time with Showtime. Obviously, you've done little bits with him through Greg Domino at Showtime previously, but this was the first one that wasn't a Triller card, so it was Showtime pay-per-view. Again, yeah, an interesting spectacle. I think more so a boxing event than we've grown accustomed to, because obviously had Daniel Dubois on the card, Ivan Barancek, Tommy Fury, of course. So that must have been quite comforting. You had a few little remnants of home life there as well with Dubois, Shane McGuigan, and Tommy Fury.
Yeah, 100%. It was great to have the British fighters there, and obviously Shane. And that's the first time I've really spent any one-to-one time with Shane. And I remember we had, so obviously, you know, you like to be tight with expenses, shall we say. So Showtime were putting on food for the fighters. So I was just at the fighters' hotel every day. So, and you'll see it from my expenses. Like my food bills probably about $20 from that week, because even though I shouldn't have been, I was ended up just eating the Showtime food.
Taking Daniel Dubois' leftovers off his plate.
And like, it was the first time I had a chance to speak to Shane, and Shane was fantastic off camera, just kind of getting to know him a bit more and build that relationship. He was brilliant just to talk to him about life away from boxing. Obviously Daniel was there. Tommy, like I get on brilliantly with Tommy, and you know, I message him every now and then. And obviously with John and with Tyson, I've got John in particular, and Peter. I've just got great relationships with them all. Tommy was fantastic. You know, invited me back to the house to do our interview. We did a little video as well, which I think went on TikTok. Him calling out, you know, Anthony Taylor on the back of all the back and forth they was having.
We had people reacting to reactions of reacting.
Shout out Anthony Taylor. Anthony was brilliant.
He was brilliant in the build-up to that.
I'm sure he'll still do plenty of things moving forwards with us if we wanted to as well. He loved me, like he loved Boxing Social. So he actually came over to me and he said, you know, I really like what you guys are doing. You know, you take so much care with all of your work and that, which was nice to hear. Obviously, I'm sure it'll be music to your ears as well.
And just to go back on the me being tight and expensive, I do make sure Andy has food and water, but I do have one rule when you're traveling. Andy, tell him the rule.
I'm trying to think what that rule is.
So the rule is, when you're traveling, if they put on free food, eat it.
Yes. So even if it's not meant for you.
Even if you don't like it, or even if it's not meant for you, if you can get away with it, eat the free food, because it's expensive in America.
But yeah, that was a great week, and obviously you got King Jake there. It's well known. There's a member of American media I do not like, who kept on trying to make his way into my shot of Tyron Woodley's huddle and the workout, and you won't know this, so this will be the first that you heard of it. He tried to do the same with King Jake, so my Boxing Social mic is firmly planted in his entire video.
It's always good when you get that free branding in there.
And across, I think, everybody's video, all you can see is a Boxing Social mic now. Because when he was just coming in, like, I was like, you're not doing that.
You make sure you get the Betfred logo in there as well.
And that's it.
Shout out Betfred. Interesting fight week. Daniel Dubois. What did you find Daniel Dubois like? Because obviously, people won't necessarily know this, but the first time we ever spoke was after you'd interviewed Daniel Dubois for Andy's World of Sport. Everybody go and subscribe to Andy's World of Sport on YouTube. So what was that like? I mean, at the time when that would have been, he would have probably been about 19 or something, 19, 20. He would have been very, very young. I know he's not much older than that now, but what was it like being around him in fight week? Did he keep himself to himself? I've not really been around Daniel in fight week, I have to say.
So Shane just said to me as soon as he arrived, he was like, mate, all Daniel does is eat and sleep. Yeah. And that was pretty much
Doesn't have a smartphone, does he? No, he's got like a Nokia 3210 or something like that, which is
just proper old school, like Shane was saying. Like, they've all been homeschooled and they just had like an old school kind of upbringing, I'd imagine. And Daniel just keeps himself to himself, trains, eats, sleeps, and that is pretty much it. And you know, I always get something. I don't know what he's like. Me and Daniel always get on well. And I always seem to get something good out of him, which I'm always appreciative with. And I think we did something a couple of days before the fight, and they've just brought the food out, and you can see towards the end of the interview he's just edging off like, mate, I just want to go eat now.
I definitely feel like he's certainly got better. The last
100%.
couple of times I've been down to the gym since they've moved gym, I certainly feel like he's coming out of his shell a lot more. He's got quite an interesting character. I think he's got quite a low key, in a similar sense to Joe Joyce, quite an underrated sense of humour, which would be nice to see that coming out a little bit more.
100%. I think whoever it is, I think there is a good interview in there, because people talk about kind of, you know, he watches like anime or cartoons or what have you, and just kind of learning more about his upbringing. I think there's definitely like a good interview to be had there, but it's just down to whoever's kind of on that level with him to get it out of him.
Yeah, well, we'll see what we can do with Mr. Dubois in the coming months. I'm sure we'll have ample opportunity. Seemed like he enjoyed his American debut against Giuseppe Cusimano. Didn't last very long though, which I think didn't really surprise an awful lot of people going in.
I think it would have been nice to see him get a couple of rounds under his belt. I think he needs a couple. You know, Shane's saying to me within 6 to 12 months he'd love to see him face a Derek Chisora, Dillian White, and Andy Ruiz. But I certainly think some tough rounds against a good opponent who's going to try and come and win is what he'd need next. And if he passes that with flying colours, then why not? Because Shane's made the point, you're not going to learn from continuing to fight those types of guys. You need to just be stepping up, because there is now there's a big gap between the level he's fighting and then world level. There's not enough fighters to bridge that gap for him. So it's one of them where I do think it's just going to come where he does need to just kind of step up. Yeah,
it'd be interesting to see who he fights next. But by all accounts, the American audience seemed to like him.
Yeah.
I think the intention was for him to go out there and just splatter somebody in a round, which is obviously what he did. American fans, or all fans, but particularly the bloodthirsty Americans, love a nice knockout, an early knockout. So yeah, if he gets maybe a Trevor Bryan or somebody like that in December, and then, you know, maybe we can see what happens after that. Final one on that trip, Jake Paul versus Tyron Woodley. The fight itself, how did you feel that the fight went?
It's hard to kind of talk about. That's how I talk about it, but effectively it was when Tyron wobbled Jake and, you know, he's held up by the ropes. I don't know why he held back and why he didn't try and put it on him a bit more. You know, Jake won comfortably on points, whether you class it as a fight or not. If you're going to score it to somebody, Jake won comfortably. I just question why Tyron didn't maybe stick it on Jake a bit more. You could see Jake tired and gassed a lot. So one thing I will say, whether you agree with him participating in the sport or not, he's committed to it.
Yeah.
He goes into training camp, he locks himself off, and he takes it as seriously as what you would want anybody to, because it is dangerous. And I'll take my hat off to him. And because of that, that's why I don't mind it, because he's not using it just to promote himself. Like, he's taking it seriously. How far he goes, I don't know. Who he wants to fight or who will fight is another question. But yeah, you know, I'll give him his props with that. And the fight itself, I thought Jake won comfortably. I'd never really thought he would ever lose that fight, especially if he went to the cards, because, you know, he had that 2 or 3 fight deal with Showtime. I don't imagine 2 fights. I don't imagine he was going to lose that first one if he had a second one lined up.
Wasn't it? Didn't somebody score it a draw? Was it a majority decision?
It's a split decision, was it?
Somebody scored it for Tyron Woodley. Did somebody score it for Woodley? Anybody?
Yeah, someone scored it for
That's
Woodley.
ridiculous. Yeah. I mean, I don't watch MMA, but a lot of my more, you know, learned MMA fan friends were telling me that's just kind of what Tyron Woodley does. He waits for the perfect shot. If it doesn't come, he doesn't like getting hit, so he doesn't close the distance. But yeah, I agree with you. I felt like certainly the second half of the fight, if Jake Paul, you know, if there was some quitting him, you would have seen it in the last few rounds, because he was knackered at the end of the 3rd or 4th round. He was exhausted. Also interesting you say there about kind of, you know, he's not using boxing as an opportunity to kind of to build his platform. He already has a pretty big platform. I don't think he really necessarily needs boxing. I'm grateful that he's decided to choose boxing as opposed to tennis, for example. Certainly better for us. I think we're there with all of the ones that you've already done. Obviously, we're going to talk a little bit about what we've got coming up. We'll just breeze through that. But what's your overriding feelings? Obviously, it's been a whirlwind 10 months. I mean, obviously, nearly 2 years for the whole world now since COVID hit. And you have been one of the fortunate people, as I've probably a couple of times when it has been difficult for you on those certainly the 5-week stretch away, I know it is very difficult to be away from your family and the hours that you work and the travel, and you do miss those home comforts sometimes. You can't get a good cup of tea in America to save your life, and little things like that can add up. So I know that it has brought with it its own challenges for you as a person, not necessarily in your job. How do you feel that you've developed, progressed as a person? How do you feel it's changed you? Do you feel the same? Or just sum it up if you can, really.
I feel like I've developed and improved a lot over the course of this 12 months. I always felt from the moment I joined up until before lockdown, I was always improving. I could see it in myself. I know where I want to improve with my own abilities. I know what is or isn't possible, but there's still a lot of work for me to do and a lot to improve on. But over them, this past 8 or 9 months, I just feel like I've come on leaps and bounds, and I've really kind of feel like I've established myself now on the UK scene, on the media interview wise, and it's certainly my name's been getting out there in America. I've been here, there, and everywhere. I just feel like I've hit that point when I'm going to these shows. I know I'm going to bang. I know I'm going to just do an amazing job. That's what's nice for me to know. It's not cocky. It's not arrogant. It's just knowing that I've got that belief in my abilities that I'm going to go and absolutely smash it. And that's proving to be the case. Like, just very briefly, obviously those 2 interviews after Paul Woodley, 700,000, Michael Bisping, 300,000, Tommy Fury, but I didn't even care about that because I knew the social media numbers were astronomical in the build up to it. So it's like, I just know wherever I go now, I'm going to smash it. I don't think anybody could have done any more than what I was pushing myself to throughout these trips. And I'm just loving it now because it's like when I go out there, I just know what I'm going to do and straight in for the kill. And like my mindset is, and it goes, I remember you telling me, if you're not first, you're last. So in anything that I do now, I not only have to be first, but I have to produce the best. So it's like I'm going out there, nobody's beating me. Even if somebody gets more views, more whatever than me, I'll never admit that they've done better than me.
I think I nicked that from Ricky Bobby from Talladega Nights. But anyway, there's more motivational speeches from me in the future. But I agree. I feel like certainly as the stretch has gone on and you've done more shows out there and become more comfortable, I get less 3-4 a.m. texts than I used to at the start of I still get a few, but less than I got at the start of the time that you travelled. And I mean, I obviously trust you to do the job anyway, otherwise I wouldn't send you. But as it's kind of developed, and I feel like, as we kind of spoke about with Canelo versus Smith and Canelo versus Saunders, you want to get off to a good start. You want to get a nice big bit of content at the start of the week. But if you don't, you also know that it'll happen later on, or maybe it won't happen later on, but there's always a reason for it. And I feel like as you've kind of progressed throughout this time and you've got more confident doing it, and also, you're younger than me, and, getting that worldly experience, particularly at your age, and doing a job like this, which a lot of people would kill to do, it really helps you become a more rounded person. And I feel like we've definitely seen that, and I feel like you've matured in that period of time, having to go out and fend for yourself and get a connecting flight here and go and stay at that hotel there and check in at 1 a.m. here and stay in that shitty Airbnb over there. It's all character building is what we like to refer to it as. So I think you've done a fantastic job. Just to echo what you've said about the UK, I think everybody over here has been very familiar with your work for a long time, but certainly in America now, which is great for us as a company. People are, without you being able to do that over the last year or so, we wouldn't have made the strides that we have in America. So that's obviously great for us, and you should be very, very proud of yourself for that. So well done. Upcoming fights: Fury Wilder 3. Canelo Plant, you're going to go and see your mate Canelo once again, and Demetrius Andrade versus, we're not allowed to say yet, so we won't talk about that one. Just a quick final one on Fury Wilder 3. Didn't get to the second one, but you were at the first one, so you're now going to witness the culmination, hopefully, hopefully there's not any. Oh God, if Wilder wins, they'll have to do a fourth one, or if there's another draw, or
Mate, just pray the fight goes ahead because I don't think you can deal with any more cancelled flights.
Well, yeah, at the minute, Fury's cost me about $2,500 in the pandemic. Cheers, Tyson. He doesn't care. But anyway, Fury Wilder 3. I think, like, for me, it feels like the longer that's elapsed between the second fight and the third fight, the closer people seem to think the third fight will be, which is mental considering how one-sided the second fight was. Anticipating any changes? Are you expecting another win for Fury? Or
I think Fury will win. But it's again that age-old question of Wilder's got that detonator of a right hand, and if he lands it, we saw him drop Fury in the first fight twice. But it's all sorts, extra time he's had to work with Malik Scott. How much of a difference will that play? Fury's had personal problems. Obviously, thankfully his daughter seems to be healthy now and out of hospital, which was great to hear. But I imagine that's had its toll on him. I don't know how long Sugar Hill's been out here in the UK training with Tyson, so has that impacted things, or is Tyson just that good he can rock up on 7-8 weeks notice, produce what he did in the second fight, and then roll on undisputed? It's just one of them fights, you just don't know what will happen. But I think most people are certainly favouring Tyson, as am I, to produce something similar to what we saw in the second fight. I think when he first lands on Deontay, that's what I'm waiting to see what Deontay's reaction is going to be like when he first feels Tyson's power. Is he going to have flashbacks to what happened in that second fight? Is he going to go into his shell and will Tyson just pummel him, or will it make Deontay revert to this heavy-handed, rely on that one punch knockout that he's got in him, or will he stick to his guns, to his game plan, and wait for that right opportunity to land on Tyson? Nobody can predict it because it's such a strange fight, but I'd still expect Tyson to win, and if not comfortably on points, then certainly by stoppage.
Yeah, it feels like it's been an awful long time since the first fight. Obviously has been an awful long time since the first fight, but it's a real full circle. The first fight, Wilder Fury 1, was our first away trip together to LA. We actually stayed in a nice Airbnb then, downtown LA. That was nice.
Still had me on the sofa.
Had you on the sofa, I have to pull rank, get the beds. And final one, Canelo versus Caleb Plant. Be careful against picking against the PBC fighters here. Our friends at PBC are gonna show us the love on these PBC shows. Canelo versus Plant, again, I think it's fair to say that Canelo goes into that rightfully as, the face of the sport and pound for pound number one as a favourite. But do you see much chance for Caleb Plant?
It's a tough one because Canelo's he's just a special fighter. It just depends on how Caleb Plant approaches it. Like, in my opinion, the way to beat Canelo, if you're not like a Beterbiev, ever put 175, who's an absolute killer, then it's similar to the approach Billy Joe took. You have to move, you have to be quick on your feet, but you've got to sit in the pocket at times. You've got to trade, but you've got to make sure if you're trading with him, you are getting the better of those exchanges. You're in, you're out. You're not allowing Canelo to build up momentum. It's so difficult to box against him, but I'll give Caleb as good a chance as what Billy Joe had. Billy Joe, he had poor performances building into Canelo. Caleb wasn't at best against Caleb Truax, but again, Caleb Plant's been after a big fight for some time himself, so I have no doubt in my mind he'll raise his levels and produce what will have to be an absolutely special display to beat Canelo. But who's to say he can't do it?
Yeah, you're getting better on that old fence sitting, mate. Keep it going.
Forgotten one though, mate. Crawford Porter.
Oh, well, you can talk about it if you want. You can talk about it if you want, but yeah, no, that's going to be one that you're going to be. I think that's November the 20th. So I think Demetrius Andrade is due to box on the day before then. So we might be out in America at the same time, depending on if I can get in at the time. You want to talk about that?
It's up to you if you want to. Just going to shout out Sean and Kenny Porter some more.
Yeah, I don't think Andy's unbiased opinion is needed on that fight. We'll talk about that slightly closer to the time because I think we've run over a little bit today. So that has been Andy's American Adventure. You've all heard the voice. Everybody, apparently the most famous voice in America now, Andi Purewal, over the last year. Done a fantastic job. Well done. Very proud of you. Like a proud father sitting at home. But anyway, well done. And I'm sure we'll catch up and do this again sometime soon. But I'll leave the floor with you. Any final words before we shut you off and kick you back out to America?
Just appreciate, obviously, the opportunities, continuing to support me throughout and allowing me to travel out there and make the most of what's been a difficult 9-10 months. And just a thank you to anybody who's tuned in and watched any of my videos, my interviews. Means the world to me when I see positive and negative comments, because the negative ones allow me to know what I want to improve on or what others would like to see me improve on. So yeah, just a shout out to anybody who's tuned in over the course of the duration of my time with Boxing Social. 3 years back in August. Yeah, time flies, and there's plenty more content to come from pound for pound.
Should never have given him that. Anyway, from me, Rob Tebbutt, from him, Andi Purewal, thanks very much for stopping by for this special edition of the Boxing Social podcast. We hope you enjoyed it.